Today at 6, one of the key witnesses against Gillane Maxwell speaks publicly after the guilty verdict. Maxwell was convicted yesterday by a jury in New York of grooming underage girls to be abused by Jeffrey Epstein. One of the victims has given her reaction.
I just feel so grateful that the jury believed us and sent a strong message that perpetrators of sexual abuse and exploitation will be held accountable no matter how much power and privilege that they have.
Also today, supplies of lateral flow tests and PCR appointments are still a problem in many parts of the UK. People in Scotland and Wales are warned not to travel to England on New Year's Eve to take advantage of more lenient COVID rules. And the new space telescope facing its first major challenge before the main mission can get underway. Good evening. A woman who gave key evidence in the trial of Gillane Maxwell has spoken publicly today, saying that she hopes the guilty verdict will bring some solace to other survivors. Annie Farmer, the only witness to use her real name during testimony, said the case demonstrated that no one could be above the law. Maxwell was found guilty yesterday by a jury in New York of grooming underage girls to be abused by her friend Jeffrey Epstein. Her lawyers say that they will appeal against the verdict. Our correspondent Ali Makbul's report from New York does contain some flashing images.
Good morning, America. Guilty.
Good morning. Guilty. A long-awaited verdict.
The downfall of the British former socialite, now a convicted sex trafficker, has been headline news here. And one of the 4 women brave enough to testify to put her behind bars, who was abused as a teenager, has been giving her reaction.
I wasn't sure that this day would ever come, and I just feel so grateful that the jury believed us and sent a strong message that perpetrators of sexual abuse and exploitation will be held accountable no matter how much power and privilege that they have.
Mr. Maxwell, can we have a statement on behalf of the family?
There's been no sense of contrition as yet from the siblings of Gillane Maxwell or regrets for the victims she played a part in sexually abusing. They released a statement saying, "We believe firmly in our sister's innocence. We're very disappointed with the verdict." One of Maxwell's lawyers, who questioned the motives of the women who came forward to testify, said this wasn't the end.
Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict. We have already started working on the appeal, and we are confident that she will be vindicated.
But legal experts appear to agree Gillane Maxwell's chances of clearing the high legal bar to win an appeal are slim. Her crimes were carried out during her long association with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, who died in prison. But they mingled with the rich and influential, including famously Prince Andrew. Their powerful connections left many of their accusers wondering if they'd ever be held accountable.
It's been such a long, hard journey to get here. So yesterday's decision, I think, will take a little while to sink in. I'm pleased that she'll never be out again, ever, to hurt anybody else. And for that, I feel very pleased.
All the while she'd been living her lavish lifestyle, she'd been hiding dark secrets. But finally, that's all caught up with Gillane Maxwell.
Well, for the latest in New York, let's join Aleem, who's there for us. We've heard from some of the victims and the accusers there, Aleem. What would you say about the broader response to the verdict?
Well, there's definitely been a sense since the convictions of, and we've heard this from lawyers, we've heard it from advocates of sexual abuse victims and from victims themselves more broadly across the United States, that they feel that potentially this conviction in such a high-profile case might give sexual abuse victims more confidence to come forward in a country where gaining a conviction is notoriously difficult. But in terms of Gillane Maxwell and her crimes, I think attention is now going to turn to other cases associated with her, and that includes a civil case being taken by Virginia Giuffre, born Virginia Roberts, against Prince Andrew for sexual assault. Now, we know that Prince Andrew and Gillane Maxwell were close friends, but his name was never mentioned in court during her trial, and he's always strenuously denied the allegations against him. but a hearing in that civil case is due to take place in a federal court here in New York in just 5 days' time.
Alim, many thanks once again. The latest there in New York, Alim Makboul. Now, the latest figures show that the number of daily COVID admissions to hospital in England has nearly doubled in a week, from just over 1,000 a week ago to more than 2,000. And there are still problems across the UK with the availability of lateral flow and PCR tests. Health officials say that millions more tests will be made available by tomorrow, that's New Year's Eve, and so-called Nightingale surge hubs are to be set up at hospitals across England in preparation for a bigger wave of Omicron admissions. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson has the latest.
The start of building work on the next wave of Nightingale hubs. This one is at St George's Hospital in southwest London. The government says it's a contingency measure in case of a surge in COVID patients, but there's concern about who will staff them.
We would prefer that the government takes steps to avoid needing to use that extra surge capacity, purely because there just aren't the number of staff needed to safely provide the care for any patients that are requiring care. And that's where the priority needs to be, to ensure that we've got staff to safely care for people that need care.
8 Nightingale units will be set up in hospital grounds to care for around 100 COVID patients each. And hospital admissions are now rising sharply in the UK, almost doubling in England in the past week. And that follows several weeks of soaring infections reaching record highs. But many people are still finding it hard to get tested.
Well, we thought we'd come to the local pharmacy to see if they've got any lateral flow tests, but you don't need to go in to see that they're out of stock. So let's try this one.
Staff suggested we go down the road to another pharmacy.
Well, I got lucky. The pharmacist here does have a box of tests. He says, in fact, he gets a delivery every day, but as soon as people find out that he's got them, they can run out in half an hour just because of the sheer size of the demand for them.
Eve Burke, a teacher in Berkshire, has COVID along with her husband and 2 children. She's hoping to get back to work next Tuesday, but can't find any lateral flow tests.
I've been trying since yesterday, going onto the government website and refreshing hourly to get LFTs sent to our home, because we can't go to a place to pick them up. And I've been messaging friends, asking if anybody has any spare that they can drop off. But the issue is everybody is in the same position. And if they do have some LFTs at home, they're holding on to them themselves.
So we're now down to our final box of lateral flow tests.
The government says 8 million lateral flow tests will be available by tomorrow. But Mark Burden, who runs 6 pharmacies in North East England, hasn't seen any extra supply.
I tried ordering an additional supply this afternoon and that order was rejected. So unfortunately, we're going to have to start to turn people away once the current supplies are exhausted. It's very frustrating when you've got people in front of you and you're unable to give them the tests that they're asking for.
And lateral flow tests become even more important from tomorrow in Northern Ireland and Wales. As in England, people with COVID will be able to end self-isolation earlier, after 7 days rather than 10, if they can get the tests and get 2 negative results. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
Ministers in Scotland and Wales are warning people not to try to travel to England to take advantage of less rigorous COVID restrictions on New Year's Eve. Nightclubs in Scotland and Wales are closed and tables in pubs, bars and restaurants have limits on numbers. That's not the case in England, which means that some people are planning to travel in order to celebrate. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent Coletta Smith reports now from Chirk, which is close to the Wales-England border.
Plans for a big night out tomorrow have been put on hold in Wales. It's masks on, 2-metre distancing, table service, and the big draw this New Year's Eve, Elvis, has left the building.
We were gutted, but understand trying to keep the cases down and what they're doing. They're trying, they're not doing it for their own benefit, they're doing it for our benefit, really, the public. I've had COVID, so I know what it's like.
The changing rules have hit Mark and Shelley's business hard because people have lots of other options close by.
You've got Liverpool and Chester up the road. They're only a train ride away, which people do venture to. So either way, we're in the middle of where they can party and we can't.
You don't want to be stuck in a pub with quiet music, and you want a bit of life New Year's Eve. When I was younger, I did.
That aqueduct marks the border between England and Wales, and like so many places along this winding border, it's just a short walk or an even shorter taxi ride until you're on the English side, where the rules for pubs and clubs are much more relaxed this New Year's Eve. Which is why the Bridge Inn are making plans to prevent a rush by selling tickets in advance.
We're going to have people coming from over the border, and then there's a worry that the locals won't be able to get a seat. But I've got my ticket because I won't be behind the bar tomorrow night. So.
But you're coming to work anyway?
I'll be on that side of the bar tomorrow night, yeah.
It's perfectly legal to cross the border for a night out, and while the Welsh Government's asking people to act conscientiously, the Scottish Government have asked people not to travel to England to party. But in Carlisle, the locals aren't concerned.
Regardless of what the politicians say, people are going to do whatever they want to anyway, aren't they? And I don't think whatever they say is going to make a difference.
So I don't really mind what the Scots do, but everyone to their own, really.
Customers and publicans are hoping the new year brings better news, whichever side of the bar or the border they're celebrating on.
Blwyddyn newydd dda, pawb. That's Happy New Year, everyone.
Coletta Smith, BBC News in Chirk.
Now, Southern Railway, which is one of the UK's major train operators, has announced that none of its trains will run to or from London Victoria until January the 10th, and that, it says, is due to coronavirus isolation and sickness. Southern operates trains to much of the south and southeast of England, including Brighton and Eastbourne and Portsmouth. And several other rail companies have also cancelled trains in the past few days due to the impact, they say, of the pandemic. Now, the new space telescope developed by NASA with help from the European and Canadian space agencies is at a critical point in its first mission. The James Webb telescope, named after a former head of NASA, is programmed to capture light from the first stars to shine in the universe. And for that to happen, the complex process of unfolding its sun shield needs to happen without a hitch, as our science editor Rebecca Morell explains now.
And liftoff. The moment of launch for an astronomy mission like no other, as the James Webb Space Telescope blasted off. Then the rocket casing opened up and the telescope was released into the darkness of space with a million-mile journey ahead. But as it travels, it has a fiendishly difficult task to do: unfolding.
It's so big, we didn't have any rocket that's big enough to launch it, fully deployed. So we had to build this telescope to be folded up to fit inside the rocket. This is really, really difficult engineering. But NASA has never shied away from doing hard things. And so I have full confidence that it's going to work.
Unfurling the sun shield is the most difficult part of this process. It's enormous, the size of a tennis court. First, its two halves are lowered into position. Then the booms are deployed. The operation involves 400 pulleys, 400 metres of cabling and more than 100 release mechanisms that have to fire at exactly the right time. Finally, the material is pulled taut and the 5 layers of the sun shield, each as thin as a human hair, separate.
The whole process has been rehearsed again and again on Earth, but doing this in space will be nail-biting.
It's made of floppy material and it has to be held onto by a series of pins which release one by one, pull it out, make it tight, release another bit, pull it out again until slowly, over days, you pull out this tennis court-sized object. So for many people working on the project, that's where the real nerves are.
The sun shield protects the telescope from the heat and light of the sun. The difference between the hot and cold sides is huge, 300 degrees Celsius. The telescope needs to operate in the coldest and darkest conditions to see the most distant stars.
For the first time, we'll be able to see all the way back to the time when these very first galaxies formed. And that will allow us to actually get images of them, verify that they are the very first galaxies. And then we can study how galaxies have evolved over the history of the universe.
The images that eventually come back from James Webb will be even more spectacular than these taken by Hubble. But there's still work to do. The sunshield will take several days to open, and that's just the start of this complex unfolding process. With so much at stake, it's a tense time for the team. Rebecca Morell, BBC News.
That's it for now. We're back on the BBC News channel within a few seconds, and of course I'll be back at 10 on BBC One. But now it's time for the news where you are. Bye for now. And here on the BBC News channel, let's carry on with the rest of the day's news. A coroner has given a verdict at the inquest into the death of the Liverpool Women's Hospital bomber Emad al-Swalamin.